Hey, good afternoon. My name is Mike Beam, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Secretary of Agriculture in Kansas. I want to welcome you to the 6th Annual Kansas Summit on Growth. This, in fact, is the first sector breakout leading up to the larger event that'll occur later in August. But we decided after last year that there was a benefit in bringing in having our individual sectors meet virtually, online, so that we could expand our reach and make it accessible to as many people as possible. I just say that, the strength of our strong Kansas ag economy is really dependent upon many different sectors and in the production chain, but those folks who work hard day to day in their farms and ranches are largely successful for all of this. The risks that they take and the perseverance, always looking at the long game as they prepare for the future. So the whole purpose of today's sector and the summit as a whole is to really try to collectively identify what our challenges may be and our opportunities to grow agriculture in the state. And for today, of course, we'll be focusing on our dairy sector. So thanks again for being a part of this program. I strongly encourage you to participate and engage and provide feedback into this session when the time is appropriate. So at this time, I'm going to turn the webinar over to our dairy sector leader, Shirley Aceto. Shirley?
Thank you, Secretary Beam. My name is Shirley Aceto, and I am with the Division of Ag Marketing here at KDA. We are pleased to have you with us today. Kansas dairy is an important sector in our state's economy. So important, in fact, that the estimated direct economic impact of the dairy sector is close to $700 million, while providing over 1,000 jobs. If you include all of the indirect and induced effects, those numbers move to a total of $1.4 billion in output and over 4,000 jobs. The vision of our agency is to provide an ideal environment for long-term sustainable agricultural prosperity and statewide economic growth. Today, we will hear about some hot topics within the dairy industry. But before we begin, I would like to go over a couple of housekeeping items. Your microphones will be muted during both presentations. This is to avoid any background noise, but we promise as soon as each presenter is finished, we will unmute you so that you can ask your questions. We encourage all of you to help make this an interactive session. If you prefer to write your question, please do so by using the chat button at the bottom of your screen. Lastly, this session is being recorded and will be posted online. I would like to now introduce you to a good friend of mine, Stephanie Eckroat, Executive Director for the Kansas Dairy Association and Commission. Welcome, Stephanie, and thank you so much for being here today with us.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am really excited. I was so honored to be asked to facilitate this session today, and we're going to have a great time, have a couple fantastic speakers. So please have some great questions ready for them and interact with everyone. It will be a good time then. So before we get started, though, I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of what's going on here in the state of Kansas in the dairy industry. Currently, we have 228 grade A dairy farms. We have 181 milk haulers, 17 processors, and milking around 173,000 dairy cows in our state. So we're doing a great job here, ranking 16th in the United States. But hopefully, with news that has come about in the last couple months, we may see an increase in that. You may all know that Hilmar had made an announcement in May that they will be moving into the Dodge City area. Big news for us for dairy processing. They are going to be bringing in over 270 brand new jobs into that area. And they're estimating the economic benefit to be around $550 million. After that, KDI, Kansas Dairy Ingredients, also made an announcement in June that they would be doing an expansion at their facility. They estimate another 40 jobs being added, and in addition to another $45 million into the economy of that area. So lots of exciting things happening in May and June, and look forward to seeing how those will play out for us in the next few years. So as we move into our first speaker, I'd like to introduce that person. Today we have Dr. Jocelyn Johnson. She will be speaking to us for beef on dairy. Jocelyn is an animal research scientist on the genetic research and development team at ST Genetics in, I'm going to mess this up, Navasota, Texas. Is that right, Dr. Johnson? Her primary duties involve leading and growing the revolutionary eco-feed and beef on dairy programs for ST Genetics. She also manages the phenotypic data collection across ST Genetics research facilities, overseeing the data collection and analyzing the phenotypic data for the phenomics and precision livestock farming projects. So we are happy to have her today, and we will turn this over to her. Make sure you have those questions for her when she's done, and you can also type them into the chat. Russell and I believe Shirley will be watching for those. Thank you, Dr. Johnson.
Thank you for that introduction. Sorry. Can everybody see my screen okay? Coming through? Okay. Thanks again for that. And I just wanted to add, I'm on the genomics research team here at ST Genetics, but I am not a geneticist. So I've been here now a little over 2 years, so I'm gotten better at pretending to be one, or at least knowing some of the words, but my background is nutrition. So if there are questions or things that you might have when more regards to genetics, we can help put you in touch with somebody else that might be able to better answer them. But we are excited to be invited to this talk. We have been pretty heavily pushing for education and whatnot in this beef on dairy world over the last year and a half. We started a big beef on dairy progeny testing program that I'm going to talk about some today. We just finished our 4th beef on dairy symposium. This symposium, we had about 150,000 cows represented in the room across about 100 different dairymen. We also had some calf raisers, feedlot folks, packers, and got to spend 3 days talking about the beef on dairy industry, where we see it going, how we can all connect the dots, and just all learning from each other. And it's been an interesting evolution over the past, we did our first one in August of last year. And even just the new information that we have today versus where everybody was at last August is pretty neat. But just to kind of give a little background, and this might be, everybody might be well aware of and already using beef semen, but essentially we've had, significant advances in that sex semen and genomics that have allowed us to really identify those animals that are the superior females that we want to make replacements out of, target those with the genetics that we're looking for to make the next generation, and then we are able to utilize that beef semen to increase the value of that terminal calf for those pregnancies where we don't need a replacement out of. And so this graph here is just one I borrowed from a colleague's presentation, where we can kind of see this trend going up in the beef cross calf in the blue down here at the bottom, where we have our dairy heifer conventional being the main thing here that's shrinking as we're starting to see more use of sex semen. And so the sex semen and beef on dairy world really tie in together well, because that sex semen allows us to know and create the exact number of females that we need, and then open up the uteruses of some of those that we might not want to continue those genetics to create that valuable calf. And so essentially this beef on dairy and sex semen world is just allowing us to create the most valuable pregnancy for every female on the farm. And so, like I said, we've been doing these symposiums for a while now, and essentially there's still kind of, while we're getting better and we're learning more, there's still a little bit of an unknown of what is the ideal index or what are the exact traits that we're going to be looking for selecting the right beef on dairy calf. I think we're getting to the point where we know that it's not just a straw of beef semen that's going to cut it in this industry, especially as it continues to evolve. But instead, we're going to be needing to identify those superior beef sires that create those good beef on dairy calves. And so we know that fertility is probably at the very front of this game. We need to be able to get our females bred. We need to make sure that we're not impacting our cow traits. And then we also want to create an animal that's going to grow and be feed efficient and yield the value that we're looking for. And so in this graph over here on the right, we've been progeny testing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, for about 1.5 years now. And this is just data collected from about 280 Angus Holstein steers. So these were all within a 2-month date of birth. So they're all within 60 days of age. They were raised together. We have them on test here together, finished them, and we processed them earlier this year. With all that data, we were able to come up with a net profit for animals. And this net profit is utilizing even individual intake information. So we have a pretty confident idea of how much those animals profited over that feeding period and over their lifetime. And we see that even in this very uniform group of animals, we have $1,000 spread in net profit of this group. And so the idea is, using genetics and genomics and the information that we're collecting and learning, how can we begin to eliminate the creation of these calves over here on the left that are not profitable and continue to create those profitable calves? And I just always throw this slide in because I think I taught some classes at Texas A&M for a while, and it was always intriguing to me to see the reaction from the kids in the room whenever I would tell them that the ag industry is not always a profitable industry, and that many years producers lose money and then, earn money in other years to help get them through. And so this was just, I had Googled, found some of these net profit of the finishing periods in Iowa, and just to show that on average here we had a negative $36 return per head of that feeding period in the last 10 years. And so if we have $1,000 spread in net profit, and we can start to select those sires that create calves that are profitable in this uniform group, we can create those that are going to be profitable even in the non-profitable years for feeding cattle. And so I'm going to go through some different examples of net profit calculations and kind of just put some numbers to the paper in regards to steers and heifers and things. And so the way that we're going to calculate this is pretty simple, but net profit is equal to the revenue, and our revenue is that sale of a finished calf. So that's the end carcass value. We have our variable input costs, which are going to be the cost of the feeder calf. If you're a dairyman that's retaining ownership, that feeder calf cost might not look like the same cost as if you're looking at this from a feedlot's perspective, who may be buying a 400-pound calf. But feed being a big one, medication, water, all of those are things that are going to be variable and changing, and our fixed costs, labor and depreciation. So we're going to talk about how we can increase the revenue and reduce the variable input costs through some of our genetic selection. All these graphs in the next couple slides are going to be of that same uniform group of steers. And so this is actual data that we collected on the individual carcasses from this group. And so we see that we had a range from $1,400 to $2,300 in revenue. And so we know that revenue is driven by that carcass weight and carcass quality. And we know that both of those traits are heritable. So we see here hot carcass weight and marbling code both have a moderate to high heritability. So we know that we can select for those traits and make progress. And our marbling code just gives us indication of the quality of that calf. And those quality traits are going to either give us discounts, or premiums at the packing plant. So these animals would have brought a discount. I think right now some of the select discounts are as much as $30 per hundredweight. So when you consider that end 1,300 pound animal at $30 a hundredweight, that's a huge loss. And then we can see those over here with that superior prime carcass that's bringing a premium. And so when we consider our variable cost, feed is going to be the #1 input cost of those dairymen that are retaining ownership on these calves. If you were a feedlot that was purchasing a 400 pound calf, that initial calf purchase might be the largest variable cost, but feed is right there behind it as being a big factor in profitability. And so if we look at the factors that are going to impact that, we have our performance, our body size. So animals have to consume feed to meet their requirements. And generally those requirements are going to go alongside with how high that level of performance is. They need energy to grow and add carcass weight. And then that body size to give an indication of their maintenance requirements. But we know that body size and performance don't give 100% indication because we know that there's some feed conversion differences there. And all of those traits are also going to be heritable. And so we know that we can identify and select for those animals that are fast gaining and efficient. And so we're going to talk about how we're doing some of those items. And this is just to kind of expand upon that. We know that an animal is consuming feed to meet their maintenance and performance requirements. And so if I was working as a consulting nutritionist and I'm trying to formulate rations, I'm going to be having to come up with an expectation of what that animal is going to consume per day in order for me to create that ration that's going to meet those animals' requirements. If every animal consumed what we expected them to, based on their body size and average daily gain, or whatever other level of performance we're looking at, the dot of that animal would fall on this black line. But of these 280 steers, we see that some fall below the line, meaning they're consuming less than we expect them to, and some fall above the line, meaning they're consuming more than we expect them to, or they're inefficient. And if we look across even this uniform population, we see that there's extreme variation, which is a good thing for genetic selection because we know that there's a lot of potential for us to identify those superior ones and make selection decisions. And if we look at just the average net profit of those inefficient animals that are consuming more than we expect them to, they had an average net profit of -$50, whereas those animals that were efficient on average brought a profit of $53. And so that's a $100 difference just based on that feed conversion alone. And so essentially we're going to talk about some of the data collection and what we're doing to where we can get to the point where we can identify those sires that are going to have increased revenue in their calves with reduced variable input costs so that we can really work to maintain the long-term sustainability of this beef on dairy program. And so here is one graph that I added in. So this is net profit on our y-axis, and this is average net profit based on sire. So I just randomly assigned sires different numbers here to keep the sires' names hidden. But this is just the average net profit of all of their progeny. There was at least 20 progeny from each of these sires, so it's decent reliability in this net profit assumption. And if we look at this and we consider what we're currently selecting on in the beef on dairy world. So in the beef on dairy world, currently we have access to Angus beef indexes. And so $B is a very popular index that we're making selection decisions on currently. And I just wanted to put this on here. I'm not saying that these indexes are bad or wrong in any way, but they are based on information from straight beef animals. And so at this point in time, we really don't have a lot of evidence to say if those animals that produce great beef offspring are the ones that are going to produce the great beef on dairy offspring. And so here we can see the $B index value with these black lines. And so if we look at the animals that had average net profit, or the progeny average of these sires, versus the animals that had higher profits, especially when we look at this animal that had extremely high gaining and efficient animals that brought a high net profit, that animal wouldn't be the one that we would have identified for selection purposes if we had gone based on this dollar beet index. And this is the same for some of these other indexes that they put together, the Angus Holstein index. And keep in mind that most of these animals that I have, the sires that we're selecting from, are sires within our lineup, and they generally are all within the top 10% of the breed. So these are all very high value sires according to the Angus breed, but we see a lot of variation where we can see that these indexes don't necessarily indicate to us what the profitability of those beef on dairy calves are going to be. And so in order for us to evaluate and come up with those indexes for this type of a program, we need to actually collect the data on these progeny ourselves. And so this is just kind of an overview of what we're doing. We're utilizing genomics. So we're taking genomic samples, we're creating our own Angus lineup, utilizing the data we're collecting. We're planning inseminations, collecting on-farm data, doing feed conversion testing, and then also collecting feedlot and carcass data on all these individual animals. And the long-term goal of that would be to identify those sires that produce the most profitable beef on dairy calf that's going to grow and be sustainable. And then eventually we could also talk about a genomic test where at a day old, we could take a DNA sample from a calf and be able to predict how they're going to perform. So this is just one of our facilities. This is in Navasota where I'm located at, and we can see the GrowSafe system here. We have some other feed intake systems that we utilize as well. And we have a capacity to test 960 beef on dairy calves at a time. And so we're maintaining this at full occupancy most of the year. So we're able to collect about 3,000 phenotypes for feed conversion, average daily gain. We collect ultrasound traits and some other traits while they're here. These animals then either stay here after that trial and we collect finishing data on them, or they go to a feedlot where we collect feedlot finishing data. And this is just kind of a summary, but the key thing to point out here is that we are bringing in targeted progeny groups. And so we're able to collect data on sires with very high reliability because we're able to test significant numbers of their offspring. And so with all that data, I just kind of wanted to talk about a couple different things on paper. So what might the difference be between the steers and heifers during this period? So there has been talk about male sex semen in this beef on dairy world and why that would be valuable. And so I just wanted to show here from the data that we've collected, we see that steers gain about 13% more per day during that growth and finishing period compared to a heifer. They do consume a little bit more, but they have an advantage of about 8% on a feed conversion standpoint. And so when we look at the cost of gain of those steers versus heifers, we can see that there's a significant reduction. When we look at the carcass, we can see some differences as well. So steers are going to be on feed for a longer period of time. We're going to take them to a higher end weight than our heifers. So our heifers are going to be a little bit younger. They're going to have a little bit lighter carcasses, a little bit smaller ribeye areas. And the ribeye area is a potential issue for our dairy industry in general, as we want to make sure that we are kind of compensating for that poor Holstein ribeye and creating a more beef-like ribeye. And with that, we see an increase. So our heifers, we know, have a little bit higher fat content. And so they do generally bring about $1 more per hundredweight on that carcass value. But overall, the steers are going to bring greater carcass in value because we're taking them to a higher end weight. But just overall, we've seen about 74% yield grade 2 and 3 from the data we've collected, 70% choice, 24% prime. So that's 94% choice and above. So these are very nice carcasses that these beef on dairy calves are able to create. One of the downfalls of the beef on dairy is the dressing percent. So we have had some groups that have dressed at what we would expect a straight beef animal, but we've also had some groups that have dressed a little bit lower. And so we're looking at all of these traits, dressing percent included, to try to find those sires that are giving us the ideal traits. If we plug some of these gender differences into a calculator that I put together, I didn't put the calculator on here, but kind of listed the assumptions in here. And we look at that feeding period from 400 to finish between the steer and heifer, we see the input cost difference. So we know that a steer's input cost is going to be greater. They're on feed for a longer period of time. But when we look at the net profit for that period, we see that the steers have about $100 advantage over a heifer when it comes to that feeding period. And that's based on the superior gain and the superior feed conversion of that steer. And so this is also one of the reasons if you're selling steers or heifers at a lighter weight, that those heifers are going to be discounted because that feedlot is looking to overcome this advantage of the male. And so they're going to pay less for those heifers. Another thing we could look at is just performance differences. So I'm going to show you here in a second some of the PTAs that we've come up with for feed conversion and average daily gain. And if we take those two traits and we consider that we have information on those traits and we make a selection decision for a calf based on those two traits, if we divided our animals into two groups, those that are inefficient, they have poor feed conversion and they are slow gaining, versus those animals that are efficient and fast gaining, we see here now almost a pound per day difference in average daily gain. The ones that are gaining less are also consuming more and have a 48% increase in their cost of gain just based on their performance and their feed conversion alone. And if we were to take that into this calculator, so you have the ability to select between two steers, and one steer is going to produce progeny that are going to fall in this red category versus a steer that's going to fall in this green category. If we put the same assumptions in, look at the differences in performance, we see that those efficient and fast gaining animals are actually going to bring us over $300 profit advantage to this feeding period. And so when we consider an industry that, say in Iowa, was negative $36 on average, and we now give you the opportunity to identify a sire that's going to bring a $300 greater profit, we can put ourselves in a position where these animals might maintain that profitability even in really poor feeding periods when feed costs are high and so forth. And so these are some of the genomic PTAs. We've used the gain data that we've collected here. And so these sires are random again, but we can see that progeny from sire Q would be expected to gain about 0.3 pounds more per day than progeny from sire A. So that equates to 30 fewer days on feed. So that's a big advantage when we start thinking about yardage, feed costs, and so forth. And then we also see quite a bit of variation in that feed conversion. And so those progeny from sire A are consuming more than we expect them to, while those progeny from sire Q are consuming less than we expect them to. And just those differences alone would equate to about $25 savings in feed cost. So we put all this information in, we started releasing EcoFeed that I could happy to give more information about if anybody is interested, but for the sake of time, we won't talk too much about today. But we started publishing EcoFeed values for our beef sires in April, and we'll continue to add data as we collect it. And then we also have started analyzing average daily gain, and we'll have carcass traits analyzed here in the next month as well. So as soon as we get enough data collected, we'll start publishing those as well. But I just wanted to show the difference here. So we have each of these rows represents a sire, and this is kind of a net profit calculation of what we expect from a profitability of the feeding period of that terminal cross progeny. And if you see here, I have the reliability of these measurements. So this bull has an EcoFeed of 95, which is below average. So it's inefficient with pretty high reliability. And it's also gaining below average with very high reliability. And so we can come up and kind of do a profit expectation of what we would think those progeny would do. And we can compare that then to another animal down here who also has extremely high reliability. And we can compare some of those differences just based on gain and RFI. And here in the next couple months, we'll also be able to add that carcass value in there. But when we look overall, we had we had a bull here that didn't show very well on our Angus indexes. And so we actually didn't think this bull was going to be a shining star. But whenever we progeny tested their animals, this bull is efficient. He produces efficient animals that are fast gaining. And if we look at the profit difference, we can see just based on these two traits alone, we have $100 profit expectation advantage of those efficient, fast gaining animals. And so our goal is just to use all that information to identify those sires. And then eventually we can provide genomic testing that'll give producers the ability to predict that performance. And even though we're going to feed those poor performing animals, we might be able to use different strategies, like maybe putting them out to pasture for that backgrounding period, or limit feeding those in some way to work on gaining an advantage that we might not have. And this just gives the producers the ability to use that genomic testing and sex semen to really boost the genetics of their next generation, while utilizing these other genomic values to create the most valuable calf out of each of those pregnancies. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Johnson, for the information. And we'll open this up now for a couple of questions for Dr. Johnson. If there's somebody out there that would like to ask, I believe, can you unmute yourself or do they need to unmute you?
Beth, this is Greg Bethard. I've got a question. Can you hear me?
Go ahead, Greg.
Okay. Dr. Johnson, curious on your heifers in the data set. Did you use MGA or spay heifers or do anything like that?
We did not spay heifers at all. We implanted, the first few groups we implanted upon arrival at around that 400 to 600 pound mark when they came on test. And then when they left our facility and entered a feedlot at around 800, 900 pounds, they went on like a standard implant protocol for that feedlot. The ones that were finished at the feedlot were provided MGA during that finishing period, but the data that we showed today was the steers and heifers on the same ration. That we ended up keeping a batch of steers and heifers that we fed out here at our facility, and we don't have the ability to feed 4 separate rations. And so they all went on the same finishing ration. So we didn't use any Optiflex or anything at the end of that finishing period as well. We just had them on a kind of high energy finishing type ration.
So do you have any experience or any data with spaying heifers and relative to performance?
I do not have any at all, but it is a discussion that we've had as to what the potential of that might be. And so a lot of the folks, when we bring that up, kind of say, why would we consider that if we have sex semen and we can just put a male pregnancy into that female? But there's also potentially some evidence that might indicate that a heifer calf might be beneficial for the cow's production and cow costs associated with that pregnancy. And so there could definitely be some opportunities there to look at which of those options might be superior.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We could take one more question before we move on to our next presenter.
Yeah, this is Linda Foster. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yes, we can.
Yeah. My question is, instead of having to cross beef with dairy, how come we're not trying to make the Holstein steer more desirable and more profitable in the first place? A lot of us are dairy farmers. We really don't want to become beef farmers. So, why can't we just make what we have better with all the technology and genomics and everything that we have?
So to make that Holstein steer better for a terminal calf, we're going to sacrifice on the dairy traits, right? So the Holstein bulls are being bred to give us the best Holstein cow currently. And we could spend a whole hour going through a presentation. We had Ty Lawrence, Dr. Ty Lawrence at our symposium from the Packer side of things and talked about Holstein. And then we had Cactus Feedlot show data from their Holsteins versus beef. And there's just, from a maintenance energy perspective and just how the Holstein animals are developed, there's a lot of negatives. So there are Holstein steers that make great ribeyes. There are Holstein steers that don't exceed Tyson's height limit, or that, don't have suffering with liver abscesses, but the effort to go into that would still produce a less profitable, less desirable end product. And so I don't foresee that being something that will really be pushed in the future.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, I think now if you have more questions for Dr. Johnson, I believe she's going to stay on with us and perhaps answer those at the end. Again, you can ask your questions in the chat, and we will also be able to see those here at the end as well. So we're going to move on to our next speaker. We're pleased here to have today Megan Sheets. She has been with Midwest Dairy for about 4 years. She's the manager for consumer insights. She's responsible for leading the strategy and execution for market and consumer research, learning and studying the needs of the consumer and what drives dairy demand. Megan, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. I saw some familiar faces hop on at the beginning, so I'm really honored to be here and have about the next 20 minutes of everyone's time to talk through some consumer trends. So with that, I will go ahead and get my screen shared so we can dive into the fun stuff right away. I do have the chat box pulled up, so feel free to add anything to the chat if you have questions throughout, and I may ask you to chime in on the chat as well. Can everybody see my screen? I'm seeing a nod. Okay, so then we will go ahead and move to the first slide here. So before I actually jump into the consumer trends and their impact on dairy, I wanted to share a quote with you that I really like, that research is a compass and not a crystal ball. In this consumer insights role with Midwest Dairy, I'm often asked, what's coming next? Of course, the last year with the pandemic has been very complex. And unfortunately, none of us have that crystal ball that is going to say exactly what is coming next. But I can tell you, with the information that we're sharing today, our approach at Midwest Dairy on the research team is to invest in research data from multiple different national and global sources, so that as we're looking for consistencies in data, we can really have that strong compass pointing us in the right direction, ensuring that dairy does have a place with our future consumers. And with that, you'll see as I go through these slides, there will be citations at the bottom on the right. I won't go too far into saying who the data source is or over explaining the data, but just know that it's there, and hopefully that gives you some confidence that, again, what we're looking for is consistencies throughout different sources. I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, but I know sometimes it's like you see one statistic somewhere and then you see something contradicting somewhere else. And so it can get kind of confusing and overwhelming when you're looking at shifts in something so complex such as human behavior. And that brings me to another quote that I really like, that's a good lens to think about consumer insights, which is, we are data rich, yet we are knowledge poor. There's so much information, but sometimes it's hard to know what that key knowledge or takeaway is, the big kind of so what for dairy. And so that's really what part of my role is to bring that forward to you. So we invest in the information, we analyze and we synthesize it to put together a little something like today, a 20-minute story of, hey, here's what we know today with consumer trends, and here's how we think they're impacting dairy. So that's just kind of a front porch to give us a good lens as we dive into the information. And knowing that the purpose of this presentation and this time together today is to talk about consumers and what consumers want, I thought this US Bank commercial that they recently released is really a perfect set the stage video to show the general mindset that consumers have right now. We're not out of the pandemic, but we're coming out of a year of a lockdown. And so people are generally feeling really optimistic and kind of ready to move forward. And so I'll hit play and let you go ahead and see the video here. And just put in the chat box if there's any problems with sound.
We're not as far from our goals as it may appear. because things are coming back, making now the time to move forward. At US Bank, our goal is getting you to where you really want to be. Because side by side, there's no telling how far you'll go. US Bank, we'll get there together.
So again, people are feeling really optimistic. And with that, I'll start our first trend. I have 3 to share today. One thing people are feeling pretty optimistic about, oh, there we go, is health and wellness. Everyone's ready to kind of get this in a good place, and people are caring more about their health and wellness. But not only is it more important to so many people right now, but the actual definition and how consumers are thinking about health and wellness has changed in the last year as well. So I'll start off by asking you all, maybe just put in the chat box, how many of you, just give me a yes if you think you've been looking for healthier food and beverages more often now because of the pandemic. I see Aaron says yes, Jonathan, yes. Ron, yes, Carrie, yes. And I can't see how many people we have here total to give a statistic. Sometimes it's fun to see with our audience, with, you know, if it matches a statistic. But I can tell you that nationally, it's 6 in 10 consumers are looking for healthier food and beverages now because of COVID-19. And then 7 in 10 consumers say that they're actually taking action to improve their health and well-being, including their physical, mental, and emotional aspects all combined. So taking a step back, what this really tells me is that not only are people caring more about health and wellness, but they're actually taking steps forward to make some changes for their health and wellness. And so what do those changes look like in practice? People are really still looking for simple solutions to help them meet their health goals. And I've included a few examples here of how companies have innovated to help consumers reach their goals. There on the left is the palate training kit. I thought this was a really neat one. It's a 30-day program, and it helps reset your palate so that you're able to make healthier choices. So that was something launched last year. And then on the right, this daily dose meal kit is high protein meals, and they're actually designed to boost your immune system. So many more people now are aware of immune health, which I'll actually talk about here in a little bit. But the point of this is meal kits are really booming nationally and globally right now, because they can individualize and help people with their individual health goals and make it simple for them. And then, you know, not only are people looking for simple and healthy solutions, but they're also really assessing their health on a much broader range of considerations. And so, whereas it used to be a little bit more simplistic, now it has gotten very complex. And I put an example here that we have data to show. Eye health and stress relief and digestive health are all claims that consumers now say they're interested in trying. And you can see 36% of people are concerned about the effects of electronic screens on their vision. So this new concern with eye health makes a lot of sense. We've all, again, had a little bit over a year where we've had maybe virtual learning with our kids, virtual socialization, and even virtual work meetings like today. And I can personally think of, I never thought I'd see the day where I attended a toddler birthday party on Zoom, but it was actually pretty neat, you know, having friends and family from across the United States that wouldn't have been able to be there in person. So all of this to say, kind of interesting to look at these health attributes like eye health and stress relief that are now rising to the top of consumers' mind. And sugar is a topic when it comes to how people view health and wellness that we can't really get away from. And I was curious myself, with all of these changes right now with consumers, where does sugar stand? And some very recent data from one of our providers, Mintel, showed us that yes, people are still looking for those no added sugar claims. It was at least half of people are looking for that. But what was interesting is, and looking in some other data points with that, is really indicating that it's not just about the no added sugar, but it's really more about people are looking for real food with clear ingredients that they can understand. There was a separate study last year that showed me kind of an interesting insight that people care more about what's in their food versus what's not in their food. So they care about those products that say maybe just 3 simple ingredients or 5 simple ingredients because they can really understand what they're eating, what they're consuming. And so with the real food without added sugar theme, I have just a couple of products I pulled here that have been launched that are good examples. This is veggie ketchup, which is just ketchup, but there's no sugar in it. Instead, it's naturally sweetened with fruits and vegetables. So great option marketed at parents. In the middle there, Chobani Complete. I don't know if any of you have tried that one. I have several in my fridge. They're really good. They're lactose-free yogurts that are high in protein, high in fiber with no sugar. And then there's this plant-based children's snack, again, free from added sugar. So a lot of examples, and we're starting to see more and more of those continue. So this is a trend that was here before the pandemic, but it is definitely continuing post-pandemic. And then I've talked a lot in the last year about how consumers are going back to the basics. March 2020, when everything was a little bit more panicked, we saw a lot of people turn back to the familiar food because it was comfortable. It brought people comfort sticking to milk, cheese, yogurt, things they've grown up with. And now, you know, everyone, this is changing a little bit. They're wanting to see new fun flavors again and get a little bit more experimental with food and beverage. So it's not as much back to the basics where we're at now, but something that's kind of emerging from that similar trend is this everything in moderation. And this, the alcohol category here has a great proof point with that. The interest in low and no alcohol by volume drinks has increased over 300% in the last 5 years. And it's kind of interesting. My family at dinner, I think it was just last week, my older brother brought a craft brew that was free of alcohol. And so it's always interesting when I see things come up in my personal life that also reflect the data that I'm seeing in my professional life. In Midwest Dairy, we had a piece of primary research that we conducted over the summer. And in that piece of research, it was 83% of consumers said that they agree that dairy products are important to an important part of a balanced diet. And so I think a key word there that will continue to resonate and be more important with our messaging to consumers about dairy is that word balance. And then the pandemic, as you know, has also really just enlightened everybody to this value of immunity and immune health. And so we think that this is something people will continue to prioritize in the future. And what's really neat about what we're looking at on the screen right now is there's a group of people that have been buying vitamins, minerals, or supplements for their immune health. And we asked them which vitamins they're taking for immune health. And to us, that's a cue of what are consumers looking for when they think about immune health. And you can see there at the top, vitamin D, C, and D. And I put an arrow there next to vitamin D and B vitamins, because as you know, dairy is a great source of vitamin D and B. So I put that to show us that we're really positioned well to succeed with this immune health trend. And I know we've been talking a lot about how health has been redefined. And I think that if you only walk away with just one slide, it would be this one, because I think it really captures it really well of what the shift is, which is really the shift to personalized wellness that is proactive instead of reactive. So you can see that it's noted as a shift from treating physical illness to proactively. Everyone wants to support their own physical, mental, and emotional health proactively. And then it's not that one size fits all, you know, this is the magic diet, this is the diet that works for everyone. And instead, kind of like I mentioned earlier with those meal kits, it's kind of about this is what works for me and my individual needs. These are the nutrients that I need to live that longer, more vibrant life. And it would be amiss if I didn't bring up the mental health aspect. Of course, this was already important and growing in importance before the pandemic, but now it's been massively amplified. And so what's kind of interesting here is you can see that 36% of people say that they have not yet tried food and beverage to reduce their stress or anxiety, but they're very much interested in trying that. So just a point of innovation really for all food and beverage to think about how we can be there for consumers and have food and beverage be that solution to help people with their mental health. And this is my last slide on this specific trend, and I'll have 2 more trends to cover. This is definitely the biggest one, but as promised, I always want to bring in kind of the lens of dairy and where we're at with this trend. And so again, over the summer, we worked with Aimpoint Research, a strategic intelligence firm, to look at kind of where dairy is, or how dairy is viewed with all of these emerging health attributes. So as I said earlier, okay, we know people are viewing their health with a more broad range of considerations, but is dairy being seen as a solution for all of those attributes? So you can see there when they were asked to identify 3 benefits that they feel that dairy products provide their personal wellness, gut and digestive health, likely that association with yogurt, and then immune health. Those were top 2, but generally you can see the numbers go down there and see really what a huge opportunity we have, as we all know that dairy has lots of different nutrients and vitamins that will support some of these attributes like eye health. And so the next trend that I'd like to talk about is building back better. That's why I love starting with that US Bank commercial, because people are feeling inspired at this point of the pandemic to not make things go back to how they were before, and not even necessarily a new normal. It's really, there's this focus on how do we take this as an opportunity to make things better than they were before. And so with that, ethics and sustainability is really front and center with this trend. And you that dairy is also seeing a rise and increase with sustainability package claims. This is 2015, and now we fortunately have all of the 2020 data to include. So this is the percentage of all dairy products launched just in the United States that have a sustainability claim. And in 2020, you can see there that green bar is almost up to that 25%. So roughly 1 in 4 dairy products launched had some sort of sustainability related claim on the packaging in 2020. And this slide really shows the natural evolution of that in packaging. And it's interesting, Mintel, they're again a market research vendor we work with, they have a whole team of analysts dedicated to just packaging. And their packaging team said they believe that responsibility is the next sustainability. And the reason for this is because now we're seeing all of these claims for sustainability and packaging, but now consumers are getting a little confused, a little skeptical. What does this even mean to them, this sustainability claim? And so with that, we're actually seeing a little bit of shift here. You can see on the left, that product says committed to sustainability. And really what we're seeing more of are those 2 packaging examples on the right. There's the dried mangoes that have a QR code that takes you directly to the mango from that farm to learn more about the great sustainability practices on that farm. So connecting the consumer to the farm, and then the container of salad there, instead of saying something directly about sustainability, they use that responsibility terminology, responsible use of land and water. So this is really kind of an interesting, again, evolution of how sustainability is being marketed to consumers. And we also know that, of course, packaging is just one piece of a much more responsible world, and consumers know that too. I like this statistic here because we know that sustainability is more top of mind for consumers because of the pandemic. And this stat here shows us 27% of consumers find sustainable production methods, so all the way on the farm, to be more important. So it's across the entire supply chain. And this product is a cool example of that, is why I've included this yogurt. So it's essenced with lemons that would have been wasted because of overproduction, or maybe there was blemishes on the lemons. And so it starts at the farm level, and then the brand has the marketing and the packaging to explain this effort to reduce waste. And then that messaging continues at the retail level to share that sustainability story or that responsibility story with consumers. And so again, I just like this example of how we're all working together across the supply chain to create this more responsible world that consumers are also invested in themselves. And we've made it to the third and final trend that I have time to talk with you about today. And I see it's 1:27, so I will go through this one pretty quick. It's all about convenience and value and how those terms have evolved. So online shopping, we know, is here to stay. Now consumers are saying in 2021, they're more comfortable with going in store. So those concerns about going in store aren't there, but we have some data to show across multiple sources that consumers are actually still continuing that habit of shopping online, whether that's delivery to their front door or the click and collect model. So that's a convenience that we think will continue to grow, and the numbers we're seeing are showing it's continuing to grow and be a huge opportunity for dairy. And there's also conveniences in stores that will continue to thrive. And so now that is really, when you think about convenience in a grocery store, it's all about sanitation and personalization and helping them save time. So these are both examples of robots now. So a robot smoothie machine at a Walmart in California, and everyone remembers the traditional salad bar that used to be in grocery stores. This is now a salad making robot. Again, all the conveniences that are really more focused on sanitation. It's kind of cool to see what's in our future. And then consumers looking for value. The main message I have here is just to share that value is not necessarily about the lowest price to shoppers. It is all about affordability, so it's a piece of it, but also convenience, like we were talking about, and safety. And as we think about where dairy is positioned here, you can see from this consumer survey, people know that dairy is safe to consume and they consider it affordable. I should say the majority of people there. And so where we really have an opportunity to provide that extra value with dairy are things like extended shelf life, sustainability claims, added nutrients like omega-3s, probiotics. So those added values will be kind of what brings dairy along in that consumer journey as they're looking for value beyond just those basic concepts of price. And this is my summary slide. So just to wrap everything up with what I've talked about, consumers and what they want real food that has added benefits that support their physical, mental, and emotional health. They want their purchases to support what's best for not only them and their health, but also the environment, for the animals on the farm, and how the whole supply chain can reduce waste. And they still want the conveniences of that seamless shopping experience from in-store to online. And of course, it has to be safe and sanitary. And they're looking for value with affordability, but also safe food and beverages that they can enjoy every day, while they still also want to indulge and have those bonus value adds that they can really enjoy. Okay, and I think it's 1:30 on the dot, so I will pass it back to Stephanie. I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we do, I would be thrilled to answer them.
I'm sure we can ask Megan a couple questions. Anybody out there have something they would like to ask Megan? All right. You did a great job, Megan. Nobody has questions. They can't figure out how to unmute their microphone.
Thank you again for having me. This is
Yes,
great, a great group.
Oh, good. We enjoyed your discussion. So we'll just open it up for any questions here for either Megan, or if someone has something for Dr. Johnson they would like to ask, please jump in here. Make sure you unmute your microphone, or if you don't feel comfortable, just type it in the chat, and Shirley or Russell will see that and share that with the group.
There's a couple questions in the chat. I wasn't sure. Do you want me to answer them there, or
Sure.
just answer
Sure,
them
go for it.
aloud?
Yeah, go for it, Dr. Johnson.
Okay. Someone asked if SD was utilizing just Angus genetics for the beef on dairy cross, or if there's some different breeds we could consider keeping in mind, like the dressing percent and moderation of size. So the data that I showed, and I did mean to take some time, so I knew I was going to be pushing time, so I was going quickly, but we have currently tested Angus and Sim Angus only. There's a lot of evidence that shows some favorability to the Charolais cross. The issue is the market really driving that black calf still. So Angus and Sim Angus will probably be maintaining our focus on. With that, the dressing percent variability is a hard one because a lot of it could be driven by management as well. So we're just continuing to collect data in that. The groups that finished with a really poor dressing percent, I think, were a management. Cattle didn't get pulled off feed when they were supposed to be pulled off feed, and so they went to the feedlot with full bellies, things along those lines. But dressing percent is an issue in general, and there are some definite advantages of some Angus when it comes to feed conversion and just overall growth and performance. But the Angus does still have a lot of advantages when it comes to the carcass quality. And with the animals that we're bringing in, since this is a Kansas meeting, we probably 80% of the animals that are part of our progeny testing program right now are being sourced from a couple different farms in Kansas. So that's where most of our calves are coming from. So we're purchasing them from customers. Some we purchase on the open market, but the majority are coming from y'all's area. And the only other thing, the second question kind of was along the same lines. Does this information apply to any beef breeds? And then like calving ease type considerations. And so Angus is definitely, as a whole in the population, they're going to have some superior calving ease type things with these beef on dairy crosses compared to some of your larger frame breeds like, you know, your Sim Angus and Charolais and so forth. But there are Sim Angus that are throwing calves that don't have calving ease problems. So what we're doing is just working to collect all the data we can. If we have a bull that comes up and is efficient and fast gaining, but has poor fertility and throws animals that have poor calving ease, then that's not going to be a bull that's going to be successful in this program. So those dairy traits really do have to have high consideration, but we may not have to sacrifice on some of the production terminal side traits just to accommodate calving ease, because a lot of these sires do tend to not have calving ease issues on some of the females, but there's a lot of work still to be done to identify those. And essentially that cost of that cow to produce that calf is going to be, you know, the number one consideration as the dairymen are making those decisions as to what breeds and what sires to utilize in that program.
All right. Any other questions for either Megan or Dr. Johnson?
Stephanie, there was a question just came in for Megan. Let's see, where'd it go there? What do you think are consumers requesting from producers? So looking at that consumer side of it, what are they really looking at from the producers?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually was just on a DMI webinar the other day where they were able to share, you know, we all know that sustainability is hard to define in the eyes of the consumer, and a few of the closest associated attributes that they use to define sustainability, I actually have pulled up here. Animal happiness and welfare rises to the top, as well as minimal carbon footprint, greenhouse gas emissions, and everything else is not as much on the production piece. So truly people just want to feel good about what they eat. And I think it's natural for us as a dairy community to want to explain a lot of the technicalities that happen in the whole supply chain before the food gets to them, that is supporting that sustainability effort through the lens of the consumer. I would say it's very simple as far as they're really just wanting to feel good about the animal welfare, the waste reduction and responsible use of land and water, and reducing carbon footprint. So there's lots of different creative ways to communicate that to consumers in ways that resonate with them. And at Midwest Dairy, we partner with retailers across the Midwest to share those sustainability stories of what's happening on the farm in a way that resonates with consumers. So hopefully that answers your question. We definitely know some of those key attributes to look for and to communicate.
All right. Any other questions for Megan or Dr. Johnson?
And I'll just say, if anybody has anything that they, you know, feel free to email or give me a call, and we're happy to share anything that we're collecting or talk anything through.
Yeah, definitely. Same here. And to to reiterate too, it really is to directly answer the question, all the great things that are already happening on the farm is what they're looking for. It's just getting that information to them that's the challenge. So not necessarily anything different, but we know there's collectively across the Midwest and the nation so many awesome things happening. It's continuing those things and building off of them and making sure consumers know that you're doing those great things.
Good deal. All right, I think now, since we're wrapping up here, let's go ahead and start our poll for our folks that are watching today. So if we could pull that up. And if you guys could please choose your top 3 that you feel are the most important things that we need to be concentrating here in the state of Kansas in the dairy industry. We'll give you just a couple minutes to go ahead and fill those out. All right, how are we doing on that? Has everyone had a chance to fill those out? Select your top 3 choices. Okay. Looks like the totals are in. So it looks like our top proposed action is federal immigration reform with a focus on long-term visas for agriculture workers and a potential immigration pilot program in Kansas. Would anybody like to weigh in on that topic? We'll go ahead and discuss a couple of these before we take off today.
This is Melissa Reed. I'll go ahead and kind of touch on that. I'm serving as the chair for the Kansas Livestock Association Dairy Council right now. And I had the opportunity to visit with a few of our congressional leaders in the last month. In particular, I focus on this immigration issue. And, you know, it kind of feels a little dead in the water right now. But I think that as we see an influx of immigration, not necessarily the legal base, we know that there's a system that can potentially help, especially Western Kansas, and kind of expanding that program. And I will tell you that in talking to the congressional leaders, I feel like we were heard. And our message to them very much was, you know, how can we expand H2A? How can we, you know, add more visas? What can we do to maybe even, you know, allow Kansas to kind of help with some of the migrants that are coming in that are displaced and need a place? Like, is there a potential opportunity for some settlement, you know, in communities where they could be comfortable? So those were kind of some of the points of topic that we discussed in a legal manner, of course.
Are there any other comments on this topic? Okay. All right, well, let's go on down to, I believe, the second. I lost my poll. It was in front of my face here.
It's dairy beef processing facility for cull cows and
Yes.
fat dairy beef to keep processing of dairy cattle in Kansas and to spur economic growth. That
Okay.
was number 2.
All right, so I know that was a hot topic last year. There was a lot of discussion on that topic. I do know that there was a meeting out in Western Kansas about that last fall. Is anyone on here that was at that meeting that would like to comment? No. Well, I was at that meeting. I thought maybe someone else would jump in. There seemed to be the consensus from a lot of the dairymen at that time that there were not enough cull cows or fat dairy beef in order to maintain a facility in that area. So that's what I know from this end. If someone else has a comment, they can jump in. All right, the last but not the least is expanded influence, presence, and professional standing of the Kansas dairy industry with consumers and policymakers. Sounds like Melissa's been doing a little bit of that, visiting with members of Congress. So are there any other comments about that one?
Stephanie, I
Yes.
would like to just maybe ask that when we're thinking of sharing the importance of dairy, not only doing it at the state and federal level, but also at the local level with, you know, some of the counties and cities to show the importance to them, the importance and, you know, the economic effect. You know, I found that number that Shirley shared about the $1.5 billion output statewide, that, you know, if you shared that with some local officials, it might get some attention, because I don't think they've probably even seen a number like that before, you know, in regards to how important dairy and ag in general is still to the state.
I totally agree with you, Aaron. They need to understand it's from the grassroots. It's where in your community is where it all begins. So I agree. Anyone else have a comment on that? Okay.
Yeah, this is Linda. I would agree with Aaron, but I also think part of talking to the consumer and influencing them is also letting them know the things that we're doing already to stay sustainable. The fact that we're multi-generation dairy or whatever, but there's a lot of things going on out there that the farmer's doing, and we just need to get our message to the consumer that we are sustainable and the different ways we do it, and explain how it is and what it is that we do.
Very good. Okay. All right. Any other comments? Okay, well, I guess we will move on, and I'm going to hand this over to Russell. I hear he is the gentleman that is going to take us out today. And thank you so much for letting me be part of your Ag Growth Summit.
Well, a big thank you to Stephanie, and a thank you to all the presenters. I thought the information was very timely, and there was some really good information and some great questions back from the participants. So thank you all for taking time out of your day to take part in this kickoff of the 21 Ag Growth Summit with the dairy sector. We will be, like we said at the beginning, this has been recorded and it will be available in the coming week. And you can find that recording at agriculture.ks.gov/summit. So the same place that you registered for the summit under the dairy sector, there will be a video link there next week. With that said, we really hope to see you right here in Manhattan in person. We are excited here in Manhattan to have everybody back. So August 26th, the Ag Growth Summit at the Manhattan Conference Center here in town. Registration's available on the Ag Summit website there on our homepage. So please be sure to register for that, and we hope to see you there. We're going to have some great topics discussed throughout the day as well. Before we go, we also want to highlight that this is the second year that the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Kansas Ag Heroes, and we want to encourage you to submit a nomination for any individual, family, or business across Kansas, specifically to agriculture, that you feel has provided notable contributions to the agriculture industry or their respective communities throughout this past year. This nomination period is currently open, and we're going to close those nominations on August 13th. So you can find those nominations instructions at agriculture.ks.gov/summit. So on the Summit homepage, you can find the Kansas Ag Heroes. So with that, again, thank everybody for participating, and we'll see you next time.